Well, the verdict's still out on the Forest Oracle and its fate, but it seems like bad presentation, but overall good story writing. And after spending weeks digging into it, I think the most interesting question isn't whether the module is good or bad, it's what can we learn from it? Because I personally don't think the Forest Oracle is a disaster like everybody says it is. I also know it's not perfect, and the places where it struggles teach us some very important lessons about adventure writing, creative writing, and just how to navigate bad writing as a whole. What can we extrapolate, and how can we make bad writing turn into an amazing world to play in, live in, write in, be in? And of course, first of all, the big lesson is that players and game masters, they need different information. One of the biggest debates surrounding the Forest Oracle comes from the information being spread across different sections of the module. Every page and every section has its own kind of faction details, and it's never really giving us a whole picture on one page. Maybe that's an organization issue, or maybe it's how we read it. But we're going to delve into how we navigate it today, and how we can do better. We're going to be learning how to make a mystery, how to make a story that can be powerful. But we need to make sure that, as a reference document, it's not frustrating. The lesson isn't don't hide information. The lesson is make sure your GM can find it. Make sure that they understand how to apply it. Players should uncover information. GMs shouldn't have to hunt for it. So for our first lesson in creative writing, everything really needs to come down to two things. Just two things. Breadcrumbs and answers. Not every clue needs to explain itself. In our excitement to get going on our master-crafted plot, we forgot that the best plots unravel slowly. The deliberate, slower pace helps with tying things into the player's choices. Their choice of direction, who they interact with, what faction they align themselves with, what their moral compass winds up actually being once they're in the town, village, or even just the world. Maybe they actually sympathize with the villain. Your whole campaign can turn upside down, and now all of a sudden, maybe they need to be the Sith apprentice and get betrayed at the end by the big bad, like, oh, who would ever thought? Well, everybody should have thought. Another big thing is getting too specific with your first breadcrumbs can have you forcing your players into situations or locations where it wouldn't make sense to the party or to the path. You wind up having to shuffle people into a situation they wouldn't normally be in just to give them a very specific breadcrumb that only this one NPC at this one town has to give them part of the plot. That doesn't serve anyone. That doesn't help. And even just having that level of specificity right on in the early, once they've narrowed down and they're like, here's the capital city where we're supposed to be, like, okay, now we can start getting more and more specific when they start folding into the plot and it goes in. But as they get further away from the road, just vague reminders, subtleties. Maybe something comes and finds them. But we need to go through and have everything make sense to the players, to the readers, to the world. Breadcrumbs also need to point to a place, a person, or a theme that makes the players feel something. If a clue only makes sense after the mystery is solved, it's not helping the players solve the mystery. And if it gives away too much, it isn't really the players solving it now, is it? We need to tell a story together. Strong story beats that can be woven into wherever the players go. That's what you really need. And we can help develop these skills together. One of the biggest points is that relationships need visibility. In the Forest Oracle, we have the townsfolk, the druids, the gypsies, we have the various monsters of the woods, and the forest itself is a main player. Where the module, I think, went wrong is that it self-contained a lot of the factions just in how they were present tense as the players see them and encounter them. I think it got confusing that people didn't read the entire thing all the way through and then put everything into the ecosystem together to flesh out a living world. And I get it. The module itself doesn't say to do that. Why would it, right? A lot of assumptions were made in the old days, and now we need a little bit more step-by-step, and a lot of times we get a lot more step-by-step. The new rule books, the new everything else, they become more inclusive. So that's why I'm here to translate a lot of the old creative writing and a lot of what we can learn and take away from it to make our games better and make our creative writing better and to make our games that we play full living ecosystems and worlds the way they used to be, the way they should have been, the way they still can be. So to make visibility, if it had gone through in the Forest Oracle and it said from the very beginning, the gypsies had come to these people for, help and aid, and they said no and all this, Give a little bit of GM backstory there, right? Tie it into the end. Maybe leave a little bit of breadcrumbs for the GMs that are reading the module, since we're all about leaving breadcrumbs and actually leading someone somewhere. But that's where the bad writing and the bad game mastering, it starts blurring lines. Where does one end and the other begin? Are they dependent on each other? And this comes down to the main question about relationships and visibility. How much should be visible right off the bat? How much should be visible to the players? How much should be visible to the GM? How do we make what the GM knows visible to the players without tilting that entire hand? A lot of game masters have gotten very good at subtlety and really slowly twisting things, but how do you pace it out for your groups? Are you good at GMing for everyone, or are you just used to GMing for one group and you know what their pacing is? Can writing solve these problems? Yes, it can. We need to remember to leave certain things open when we're writing and running adventures, because that's what makes it so adaptable. You can take an entire module like the Forest Oracle, or independent pieces that come from it, and use it how you like. You can take the townsfolk and put them into a modern setting. You can make them a small town at the edge of Virginia. You can put them in the Appalachian Mountains. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't change the story. Gypsies can be anyone, anything, any traveling folk, and I like that correction in the module itself, calling them a traveling people or traveling folk, because we have people that are purposefully nomadic. We have cultures and everything that have stemmed up from being nomadic and traveling people since the dawn of time. So you can plug and play this any way you want. And that's where we get to, if you start tightening down too much, you take away player agency. You take away the availability to plug and play these things into any world. And talking about that, the factions, the visibility, do we make them good, do we make them bad, or do we make them mixed and complex right off the bat? We can open this up to wherever the players go, instead of just reading straight from the page. Things that aren't super clear and things that are loose, like the Forest Oracle, give the players that agency, and it doesn't feel like it. It doesn't look like it. It doesn't read like it. But it's there. When it says, if the players decide to faff about in the town, that they can buy some standard stuff, but then people get sick of them and actually kick them out of the town. Okay, that means on to the next adventure module, contingency, or they have to leave town and they get sucked into the woods anyways, right? The woods being this treasure trove of magical energy to the point where the druids build a sanctuary in it. That's a living thing. Why is it so hard to find the old path? Because the forest doesn't want it to be seen. Why does it protect these ecosystems? Because it's living. It is protecting them. It doesn't just seem like it is doing it. And this is where breadcrumbs. Everything comes down to the clues that we leave. The size of the breadcrumbs, and how many we scatter about, where they all point. These all start painting a picture of either a living world or a world on rails. If you get too specific, it feels so directed, because it is. You wind up navigating through a couple of options into a GM cutscene where you don't have a whole lot of say. The adventure is out of your hands, you're just turning pages and reading the storybook and hopefully rolling all right, if there are that many rolls to be had. This will mean that each adventure would only be fitting for specific groups as well. The way that they like to play, or the stories that they like. This looser freedom, yeah, it expects more out of the game masters. It's not asking any more out of the players. It's just asking the players to ask the questions that they should be asking in the first place, and is asking game masters to do what a game master is supposed to do. But it gives players this agency, this freedom. We can tailor it to our groups, our tables, and our stories, no matter what the module, no matter what world we're running it in. And mystery requires orientation. Any mystery, any plot, should leave players wondering, what happened? Not, where do we go? Not, what are we supposed to be doing? Not, did we miss a page? Players can be lost inside the story. They shouldn't be lost trying to find the story. So what does that look like? You need to know what experience you're designing. Players can be lost inside the story, and they should be lost inside the story. They shouldn't be lost trying to find the story. So what does that look like? You need to know what experience you're designing first. Is it a mystery? Political? Is it combat? Logistical? What type of adventure and what type of world does your table want to live in? Not just play. What will they actually spend time getting to know? Not just a passing glance. This gets you set up for your main conflict. and your BBEG, your big bad, whatever you want to call it, your main antagonist for story writing and creative writing purposes. So you set up your main conflict. Now, what impacts does that conflict? What impacts does that person, entity, being, whatever it is that's your antagonist, what impact do they have everywhere else? Because they will. The whole point of them being an antagonist is they have impact somewhere that's going to make it difficult to do something good, or that's going to be making something evil happen if good doesn't prevail, right? We're just going to bare bones basics here. So knowing what kind of story you want to play, knowing who your what your antagonist is, and then spread that out. Their sphere of influence, right? We're going to use, say, a kingdom, right? You have an evil king. That's so standard, right? You have evil king that wants to destroy all of a certain land and take them as, indentured servants or whatever. The sphere of influence becomes, what does the court think? What does the rest of the countryside think? Do all of the nobles agree, or is it contested? Is there the potential for civil war to start up? Are there tensions around? And you don't need to answer each faction by name and color and banner. That doesn't matter. The thing is, think about the possibility, the probability even. Because then when your players get to it, right, you go, okay, this is a smaller town. You know what? Yeah, evens or odds on evens, they're actually against the king. And they might be able to lend some aid. They might be poor, so they don't have much to offer. The players still have to be the heroes, right? But the town can help. Maybe they have information. Maybe they have stories. Everything doesn't have to be interconnected to the point of every bit of the conspiracy has to be labeled out. But when we have looser breadcrumbs, when we have families that go, the king killed my father. I just like a taste of revenge. I'm not asking you to kill the king. I'm just asking for a little bit of a lord just to fall like my father did. That will make me happy at last. And that really lets you set the stage of, okay, what did this noble do? Is this noble in line with the king? Maybe they don't ask. Maybe they go and they kill the noble. Then there's a letter saying how this noble despised the king and his actions, and how they were going to rise up with a noble rebellion. Or maybe he was the one secretly twisting the screws behind, and actually he was the villain, and the king is unaware, except for the court magician is going to get him behind his back. We have so many places we could go with this, and that's the point. Things looser, making environments that support the larger ecosystem. That is how you build better stories. You build sandboxes that have hidden rails built in. You have one-shots that have more visible rails, but everything feels more fluid. If they want to go somewhere else, fine. Have something find them then. We're not constrained to the players only having agency if it's a true living world. The world has agency. The villain has agency. His minions have as much agency as the villain is going to give them. Let's be honest, they're minions. But they have that. And we're seeing less and less of this ecosystem understanding the more and more that we try to go towards living worlds. All this modern advice is have smaller tables. Don't run for so many players. Go through and have all of these tools and things in mind. Run all these systems and these 17 books. And why? It comes down to writing. And once you get that writing down, your preparation becomes almost nothing. I was running games for 10 to 13 players for campaigns that went on for 1 to 2 years at a time. I had this group together for about 9 years. Started off with 4 players and it just grew from there very quickly. So I've done it. And I did it with maybe 8 hours of preparation, if that. I was also cooking and hosting and doing everything else with the group there most of the time. We started switching off and it started being a real big community kind of potluck thing. But the whole point is, it can be done, and it can be done fairly easily once you get into the habit of understanding how to build ecosystems. And the worst module ever, the Forest Oracle, actually shows us a lot of details on how to do that correctly. And then locations. How are the locations impacted? Was there a war? Is a whole town just burned to the ground because someone did try to rise up? We can start having locations tell a story and make the world feel more lethal. We don't need to kill players. We can kill everybody else. If we go through and do that, the world's still lethal. It feels dangerous. We can have very odd ways, like raising an entire village to the ground, but not having a single brick left standing, right? Like everything is completely gone except for like singed remains of what used to be, but nothing solid. or it could be like dissolved into a puddle, you know, or swallowed up by a deep pit. There's so many things that we could do to make it odd, mysterious, and just overall dangerous. But locations work with this ecosystem too. They can be characters, and they can have characters in them. So, what are the relationships? How visible should they be? And starting with, what kind of campaign do you want to run? What kind of campaign does your table want to work with? Make your big bad, figure out sphere of influence, what happens inside and outside of those spheres. How do things react? Who wants retaliation? Some of these times I just go through and roll, I call them narrative dice. I have a d20 for chaos, a d20 for karma, a d20 for threat, and a d20 for advantage, respectively, right? They all work together. I roll them together. It's actually a core mechanic of the game system that I've made called Mythic. The narrative dice actually set a lot of these scenes and help game masters run a narratively open system in a wonderful pressure engine that drives narrative gameplay while preserving crunch right at the heart of the action. And that's what we need to be doing. We need to be writing that way. We need to be putting things open narratively and then detailed when it comes to tactical. That's how it always should have been. And yet, I don't see really a whole lot of people doing it correctly. Even if systems allow them to, a lot of game masters, a lot of players, people fill in the gaps a lot differently sometimes. And just remember, roll a dice, see how an NPC feels about the big bad or the theme or even just actions in the adventure. They can be against the players even. NPCs go, I heard what you did on the road last summer. I didn't like it one bit. I didn't say nothing. So you might owe me some. Take about 5 copper for that and I'll nick the sword off your belt. Anyways, the whole point being that it can be anything. A dialogue, a scene, living conditions that the players can hear, see, or interact with. And the Forest Oracle is criticized because people expected one thing and they got something else. They didn't know if it was a wilderness crawl. They didn't know if it was social investigation or just a fanciful folklore story. And modern adventures always tell the GM, well, often tell the GM, this is a mystery adventure or a hex crawl or political intrigue. And I kind of think that's wrong. Adventures should show us and not tell us. They should give us breadcrumbs that we can change to actually entice the players that we have and make adventure modules in a world that has problems. You can give some solutions to these problems, but we need to leave a lot of things not just for players to discover, but to use, to think about, for the characters to live through. No, the Forest Oracle doesn't clearly communicate what experience it's trying to deliver. But as a writer, one of the first things you should know is, what's the primary experience? The Forest Oracle, I think, does this correctly from a writing standpoint, but not a presentation standpoint. It knows what kind of adventure it's trying to be a social investigation, mixed with the guise of folklore. It's supposed to have some metagaming. It's supposed to be adventurers that are not level 1, so they are supposed to have some experience with monsters, fae, dryads. Like, you're supposed to know a little bit, and this expects you to know a little bit because you don't just start at level 2. You don't just make level 2 characters. You start at level 1 and you work your way up. That's what this was meant to do. Then you ask, as a writer, how does your location and the people in it serve the primary experience? Well, using the Forest Oracle again, the people serve to show that it's all a social paradigm. The townsfolk don't like one group, but they trust another group to help, even though they know that that's not the group that could help. Everything in the forest is at very weird odds. The druids are at odds with, I think, anything that's trying to capture magical or magnificent living creatures and force them to do something that they're not meant to do. And we see that in the writing plain as day with the goblins. And this is where we get the real value of studying old adventures. It isn't discussing if they're good or bad. It's discovering writing lessons and moral lessons and social lessons, things that they're trying to teach us to look deeper into, to look at from a different angle. Sometimes those lessons come from the adventure module's success. Sometimes it comes from their mistakes. But usually, it comes from a mix of both. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video so far. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe. Greatly appreciate it. And this is the first bit on our creative writing segment. We're kind of switching up our long form segments. Every week will be kind of in a rotation of something, and then our shorts will follow a weekly format. So check us out on Patreon, Mythic and Pastor Game Master, MYTHIQ. for Mythic, and we'd love to see you over there. We got our Alpha Ashcan Founder Edition playtest rules up on Patreon now, so you can pick up the actual playtest rules, and we're going to have adventure modules that are playtest modules, single, one-shot, small, playtest scenarios that I have mapped out and scripted and did everything with my playtest group so that you can run it and give us your feedback for what you playtest with our system. So, hope to see you there, and have a wonderful week. And I will see you in the next session.